Bloody hell, wrestling's a really expensive career. I mean, obviously all your favorite stars are getting fat stacks, but there are a huge number of costs packed into wrestlers' busy schedules. Wrestlers pay for their food on the road, any non-air travel, book their own hotels most of the time, pay for their own gym time in between shows, pay to travel for interviews, and that's not even taking into account all the little pay cuts you can accrue for breaking one of WWE's 2,316 micro rules. We're not talking kayfabe fines like the one Ronda was recently given. We're talking real-life fines for rule breaking, like wrestlers being charged between $1,000 and $2,500 a pop for weed use. Must have racked up a pretty hefty bill for Brian Kendrick, who famously failed weed tests 12 times. Daniel Bryan, Randy Orton, Triple H, and Undertaker have all been fined hefty, undisclosed amounts for chair shots to the head since the 2008 ban. Cody Rhodes has joked about being repeatedly fined $1,000 by WWE each time he's called championships belts on telly. Heck, even an entire promotion was fined once, with TNA coughing up $225 for a fire that broke out on their Hard Justice pay-per-view in 2006. Those are some of the silliest. Now let's check out the biggest. I'm Adam, hailing from partsFUNknown, and here are the 10 biggest real-life fines ever handed out in wrestling. Would you like to be as hairless as your favorite wrestler, as long as your favorite wrestler isn't Albert Big Damo or George the Animal Steel? Of course you would. That's why you need this video's sponsor, Manscaped, the global brand for men's grooming and hygiene products. Manscaped offers the best tools and liquid formulations for the big three odor zones: your body, your balls, and your butt ass. Butt works better there. Manscaped has hooked all of us up here at PFK with a bunch of stuff from their all-in-one Performance Package 4.0. Let's check out what's inside. You got your Lawnmower 4.0 body trimmer, Manscaped's 4th generation electric waterproof trimmer with advanced skin-safe technology, which reduces nicks and cuts on the most sensitive regions of your body, like your butt ass. Comes with LED tech, and it can even function under running water in the shower. Also included are 2 products like the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant to make your man grape smell radiant, and the Crop Reviver Ball Toner Spray. I didn't know you could tone a small brain, but I'm no scientist. But it's not just your unmentionables that Manscaped's got covered. My personal favorite piece of this collection is their Weed Whacker nose and ear hair trimmer, a product that I suddenly desperately need now that my 34-year-old nose has decided that it hates me and all my social prospects. Join Manscaped now, and for a limited time, you get all this plus 2 free gifts: the Shed Travel Bag and the Manscaped Anti-Chafing Boxer Briefs, which I'm wearing as I record this voiceover, and you have to know that now. Go to manscaped.com today and get 20% off and free international shipping plus 2 free gifts when you use the promo code PFK at checkout. That's promo code PFK at checkout. Manscaped, always use the right tools for the job. And if you'd like to check out some other top 10s, why not check out some of the other ones we've got here on partsFUNknown, including 10 biggest mistakes WWE made with Sasha Banks. That's a good one. Number 10, Titus O'Neil, $5,000. God, this story doesn't get any less strange with age. 6 years ago, for anyone who wants to feel old, Daniel Bryan officially retired on a February episode of Raw in a moment that even made the unfeeling, unweeping Ollie Davies of this world shed a tear. That segment, and indeed the entire episode, ended with all the wrestlers, including the McMahon family, standing on the ramp to applaud Bryan's accomplishments. As the show went off the air, Vince McMahon was walking to the back when Titus O'Neil reached out and grabbed his arm, reportedly as a jokey way of reminding Vince to let Stephanie leave first. Not really reading the emotionally charged room there, sweet tea, but even so, what happened next is quite silly. Vince shoved Titus in a rage, immediately went to have him sacked, had to be talked down before bringing his punishment down to an air quotes mere 60-day suspension and a whopping $5,000 fine, presumably as an example to the roster to never cross the boss, especially when he's all sad. Number 9, Ric Flair and Randy Savage, $5,000. Blading, the sacred art of wrestlers turning on the red tap in their head for the entertainment of lunatics. By the way, if you'd like to learn more about blading in wrestling, check out Laurie's bloody excellent, pun intended, blading explained video on the channel. It's ace. But the main thing you should know is that blading's been banned multiple times in WWE's history. It's currently wink wink forbidden today since dub went PG in 2008, but it was also banned during the Hulkamania era, families and that. Of course, there were incidences of people blading back then, but if you could pass it off as hard way, like Bret Hart would frequently do, then you could avoid the hefty punishment. But Ric Flair has never been quite that subtle. At WrestleMania 8, during their WWE Championship match, Flair bladed directly on camera, and for their complicity, both men in the match were fined $5,000 apiece. On that same show, Bret Hart also bladed in his match with Roddy Piper, but was able to pass it off as real backstage, avoiding the same fine. Clever hitman. Number 8, Jerry Saggs, $7,000. All right, now let's talk farts. It's been a hot minute since flatulence has taken center stage in a partsFUNknown list. We are a classy production after all. Look at all this classy imagery on screen. Classy. Anyway, so Jerry Saggs was fined $7,000 for farting spitting in Miss Elizabeth's face, and there it goes, all the class down the drain. So the story goes, wrestlers were at the airport, Sags bent down to pick up his bags, while Miss Elizabeth was bending down to do the same behind him. Sags let one rip, so loud and pronounced that it moved Elizabeth's hair, which is gross. No one wants to be crop dusted, least of all by someone who's officially called a nasty boy. Randy Savage went ballistic, as Randy often did when Elizabeth was involved, and had Miss Liz flown all the way home. WWE needed Elizabeth for some of the shows on the tour, so had her flown all the way back and took the costs of both last-minute flights, totaling roughly $7,000 out of Jerry's paycheck, with Vince McMahon saying to Sag's partner in the Nasty Boys, Brian Knobbs, let Jerry know that is the most expensive gas he'll ever pass. And hey, speaking of the Nasty Boys, number 7, Brian Knobbs, $10,000. In the early 90s, WWE ran into a scandal that almost single-handedly ended the Hulkamania era and could have driven the company out of business entirely, the infamous steroid scandal. In 1991, Dr. Zahorin was on trial for illegally supplying steroids, and during that trial, it became public knowledge that he'd supplied steroids to WWF and its wrestlers. In the fallout, the main event scene of the company underwent a drastic change, and Vince implemented a crazy strict drug testing policy, testing not only for steroids, but for all non-prescription drugs, including Peter Parker Paramore, Sweet Mary Jane. Brian Knobbs was one of the first to test the boundaries of this rule, testing positive for cannabis soon after, and found out that, oh yes, Vince is actually serious about this one, receiving a staggering fine of $10,000, 4 times what wrestlers like Sabu, RVD, and Kendrick would receive for their infractions in the mid-2000s. Being nasty doesn't pay. Number 6, Bob Holly, $10,000. We all need a hobby. I like playing board games. Luke is building that scale model of Godzuki in his back garden using popsicle sticks, and Sullivan's a huge fan of hunting squirrels for their meat, or as he calls it, the gentleman's game. Hardcore Holly had a hobby, but his proved slightly more costly for him. See, back in the 2000s, Holly, enjoying his veteran status, was a big fan of dickhead justice, beating the piss out of younger wrestlers for perceived slights against the strict honor codes of wrestling. Honor codes like in 2004, Rene Dupree accidentally getting a speeding ticket in a car that was registered under Holly's name, resulting in a fine and a court appearance for Mr. Hardcore. Now sure, that's a workplace grievance that HR might have wanted to take a hand in, but Holly preferred to get his own hands in, kicking the ever-living out of Dupree in a house show, stiffing him with punches to the face and a chair shot to the head. As a result of this dickhead justice, Holly allegedly received a $10,000 fine. What a jolly business wrestling is. Number 5, Shawn Michaels, $10,000. Here's a trivia question for you. Who has the world's costliest penis? The answer to that question may very well be the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, who allegedly received a fine of $10,000. Some have even speculated it went up to $50,000 for artificially enlarging his package live on Monday night. The year was 1997, and Shawn was engaged in a torrid love affair with being a massive jag all the time. On an episode of Raw airing September 15th, a few weeks before Bad Blood and the first ever Hell in a Cell match, Shawn came to the ring wearing a very tight pair of shorts, which was the style at the time, which also happened to be stuffed with gauze to create the very visible outline of a Herculean ding-dong. In a part of the interview that's actually cut from the network, Shawn also repeatedly leaps into the air, thrusting his giant fake dick into JR's face and telling him to suck it. Perhaps the reason why Shawn was fined as heavily as he was by Vince is that he did it on a show where Vince McMahon was away. But even though a few months later this kind of behavior would become the standard of Raw's Attitude Era, for now HBK had to HB pay. Number 4, John Cena, $88,000. Dark matches, they truly are the best. See, why it might seem like the fun stops at a wrestling show when the cameras turn off, often that's the only time the fun actually starts, with wrestlers getting to goof around like they're at a house show and blow off steam after the heavily scripted TV segments. We've probably all seen the footage of Undertaker dropping his act in a match, running around for a hot tag like he's a coked up cruiserweight, or Triple H overselling a stunner party after Raw stops taping. If you've experienced something like this, drop a story in the comments about a time you've watched a dark match and something silly has happened. Anyway, in March 2018, after an episode of SmackDown, WWE held a 6-man tag pitting AJ Styles and the Usos versus Baron Corbin and Rusev Day. Toward the end of the match, AJ Styles takes the ref shirt off the official Danilo Amphibio, who then join the Usos in hitting the heels with a trio of super kicks before going for the pin on Rusev, countered by the Phenomenal One. That is, objectively, larks, but whoever was in charge of backstage that day disagreed, chewing everyone out for making fun of the business and handing out fines to all involved. The fines totaled $88,000 all put together, which John Cena decided to pay on behalf of the men because John Cena might be a robot, but at least he was programmed to feel joy. Number 3, Batista, $100,000. The day wrestlers wrestling stopped being fun for Batista. So the year was 2008, not necessarily a terrible one in terms of stories, but in terms of how WWE's format would change, catastrophic. Not only did the show go HD, and I still miss the grain on the film in the pre-HD days, nostalgia probably just suits wrestling more, I think. The major change, of course, was going PG and instituting a hard ban on blading. Much like when the strict drug test policy was established in the early 90s, naturally wrestlers want to push against the electric fence to test the voltage. Shortly after the ban, on Raw's 800th episode, Batista fought Chris Jericho in a cage match and bladed. Furious, like he always is, and intent to prevent such behavior from happening in the future, Vince handed down a colossal fine of $100,000 reduce to the animal, making it the most expensive boo-boo in the world. Number 2, Lars Sullivan, 100 grand. Lars Sullivan, not to be confused with Large Sullivan, who is 12 feet tall and who Sully wants to become when he grows up, is a former WWE wrestler who did not have a good time over there. He debuted as a monster but became permanently shelved after comments he'd made on message boards years before signing with WWE were unearthed by the internet. Some were homophobic comments written on bodybuilder forums, others were racially motivated, and some were of a sexual nature regarding Stephanie McMahon, which might go some way towards explaining why Lars was hit with a fine as large as Lars would never become, to the tune of $100,000. Of course, it might also have something to do with one of WWE's sponsors, Mars Wrigley, publicly commenting on the comment in disgust. And generally speaking, if we remember the whole Fabulous Moolah Snickers debate, WWE only tend to take heavy action against its talent when a sponsor kicks a fit. And number 1, Steve Austin, $250,000. I suppose it makes sense that the one man who most made Vince's life a living hell, if you exclude Vince himself, Steve Austin would have received the biggest fine ever issued by WWE management. However, it wasn't fulfilling Vince's Corvette with cement, shoving Mike Tyson, or even delivering the stunner to the entire McMahon family on Raw Homecoming. Instead, it was for taking his ball and going home. Austin infamously walked out on WWE in June 2002 because he hated the booking and wouldn't return for 8 long months. As we've seen many times on this list, WWE like to make examples of people as a lesson to the rest, which is why Vince initially fined Stone Cold Steve Austin, his biggest ever star, for up and quitting, a ludicrous sum of $650,000. Austin told this story on his Broken Skull Sessions episode with Vince, to which McMahon responded that Austin needed a, quote, slap on the wrist for walking out on the company, and that is a heck of a slap. Austin apparently managed to negotiate the actual sum paid down to $250,000, but $250,000 just for telling your boss to take his job and shove it, that's the most expensive sass that he's ever passed. And that's our list. Did we miss any famous examples? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and share this video around if you enjoyed it. Make sure you're subscribed to partsFUNknown for more silly wrestling content, and never forget to jam that jam.